we're on Romans chapter 3, verses 1 to 8. God's faithfulness. So far in Romans, we have seen that God is perfect in every way, and because he is the creator of everyone and everything, he has the right to judge our actions. No one else really has the right but our creator. God is completely holy and right, or what we would say righteous, in every way. When he sees his creation as godless and wicked people, he shows his revulsion against what is contrary to his own will, because he cannot stand sin. He hates sin. Paul paints a picture of how the Gentiles live, chasing after the sinful desires of their hearts and their flesh, and when they showed no sign of repenting of their deeds, God gave them over to a depraved mind. You remember that one of the first things that we went through, to do what ought not to be done. That was in chapter 1, verse 28. Then Paul names the categories of the sins that they were committing, and that's in verse 30 of chapter 1. We're in chapter 3 now. Then Paul outlines the ways God will judge his creation. Motive is very important in this process. Motive is always very important. They will either have eternal life for seeking glory, honor, and immortality, or they will obtain God's wrath and anger for their evil ways. So believe me, a lot of people say, well, my sin doesn't affect anybody else but me. Oh, contrary. That's not true at all. It affects everybody that you're around. It affects your family. It may be the reason why you don't have your wife with you anymore, why your kids were taken away from you, you name it. This, Paul says, is true whether you are a Jew or a Gentile. People are people. And all people were born under the curse of sin, curse of Adam's first sin. We have, they call it an Adamic, which means Adam, an Adamic character. We tend to want to rebel. We tend to want to reject goodness. We tend to want to do what we want to do and not what we know is right to do. And after we've done this for a long period of time, our conscience no longer sees things straight. This letter that Paul wrote to the Romans tells a story of whether you are a Jew or a Gentile. You will one day stand before a truly righteous God, and he will know everything about us, our thoughts, our words, our deeds, and he will also know our motives as well. Now, Paul was a Jew, and he knew the law of Moses very well. He was trained under one of the most prestigious rabbis of the time, Gamaliel. He understood his fellow countrymen and how they thought. He understood the Jews. So when a Jew was kind of rejecting the message of the gospel, he understood the way they thought. He knew how to approach them. He addressed the significant parts of their beliefs. He addressed them about circumcision and the law of Moses. He shows their failings in both of these areas. He's saying, well, if you think that you're going to satisfy God for your life by simply being circumcised without it being something that came from a good motive of your heart, and if you're trying to obey the letter of the law with the law of Moses, not just the 10 Commandments, but the other 600 plus commands, you're not going to be able to do it. So they're saying, oh, well, we're Jews, we're children of Abraham, and so we don't need, But he's reminding them, you don't even keep. You who preach to people not to steal, do you rob the temples? Do you commit adultery, and yet you teach not to commit adultery? And then he says, and the Gentiles obey the law, sometimes accidentally. In other words, they didn't decide they were going to obey the law simply because they wanted to become a Jew. Part of their culture said, you need to take care of your family members. You need to not commit adultery. I mean, that was kind of a no-brainer, even for the pagans. And in so doing, they were obeying the law. And he says, you will actually be the ones that will condemn the Jews for what they're doing. And that, boy, the Jews definitely didn't want to hear that. So is there an advantage to being a Jew? He says, much in every way. They have been entrusted, the Jew have been entrusted with the very words of God. In other words, God didn't meet with, when he met with Moses on Mount Sinai for 40 days, that he was up there and received the 2 tablets of the 10 Commandments plus all the other teachings. I guess he must have, I don't know how he remembered all that stuff, but I'm sure it's the Spirit of God. God didn't do the same thing with other cultures and other races. He did it only with the Jews, because he was the one that really created the first Jew with Abraham, because Abraham believed in one God when the whole rest of the world believed in multiple gods. But there's an awesome responsibility that comes when you've received this word of God. But suppose they didn't have faith. I mean, they've received all of this, but they didn't really have any faith in, well, do I really believe that this is... Would God's promises be null and void simply because some of the people didn't believe it? No. It's still the truth. The truth is the truth, regardless of whether people condemn it and say it's not true. Well, you're going to hear people that are going to come to you and say, I can't believe that you believe in all those fairy tales. Jonah and the whale and all of this stuff. And it doesn't make it any less true because people scorn and mock you for what you believe in. Are God's promises that he makes conditional? What does that mean?
If you do this, I'll do this.
There's a condition. If you're a good boy, then you'll get dessert after dinner. If you're not a good boy, then you may not even get dinner. No, there's no conditions with God's. God made his promises. But of course, we learned a long time ago in the Old Testament that there were the curses and the blessings. There were the blessings that if you obeyed God, he would give you the rain in its season, your crops would grow, your sheep would have, instead of maybe one lamb, they'd have 5 or 6 lambs, and in other words, you were being blessed. But if you disobeyed God, he said your enemies will come and carry you away, and that's exactly what happened when the Babylonians marched into Judah and marched up to the temple. They didn't just come once, they came several times, carting away everything of any value, as well as all of the young, brightest people. Even when men lie and don't believe, God still remains true. He is our rock. He's our anchor. We can always depend on his truth. Israel will be punished for their unbelief, just as God's covenant tells us. So let's look at Romans 3. Finally got to the second page. This typing
You
is
got
type.
little teeny weeny
Oh, I got it,
types. I'm
yes.
on, how many pages?
Yeah,
I'm on 1, 2, 3, I'm on the 4th page.
yeah.
But I got big type.
Yes, you do. Okay, God's faithfulness. What advantage then is there in being a Jew, or what value is there in circumcision? Much in every way. First of all, they have been entrusted, meaning the Jews, been entrusted with the very words of God. And what if some do not have faith? Will their lack of faith nullify God's faithfulness? Not at all. Let God be true and every man a liar. As it is written, so that you may be proved right when you speak and prevail when you judge. But if our unrighteousness brings out, make sure I'm not going. If our righteousness brings out God's righteousness more clearly, what shall we say? That God is unjust in bringing his wrath on us? Now this is a very interesting human argument. He's saying, if our unrighteousness shows just how righteous God is, in other words, if God knows that we're sinful, then how can he punish us for being sinful? As if we didn't have something to say about it. As if we didn't have a free will to make up our mind. So that's and evidently, and he in parentheses, Paul says, I'm using a human argument, a lame argument, but certainly not. If that were so, how could God judge the world? He couldn't judge the world. He'd have to say, well, you all are under sin in this world, so I can't condemn you for being sinful. No, but I can condemn you for making the poor choices and the wrong choices. Someone might argue, if my falsehood, if my lying, enhances God's truthfulness and so increases his glory, why am I still condemned as a sinner? Boy, they're really looking for a way out. Why is that? Because mankind wants to continue sinning and doing what makes them feel good, regardless of what God says. And if they can figure out a loophole, then they're going to look for it. All right, why not say? Verse 8. As we are being slanderously reported as saying, so people were accusing Paul of saying what he's about to say. And some claim that we say this, let us do evil that good may result. They're saying this is what Paul is telling. If you want to stop somebody from saying what you don't want them to say, or you don't want to hear it, then you can mess with their motive or mess with their words to make it sound like, we see this all the time in politics. All the time. It's just a matter of saying, hey, is it, or take it out of context, right? Is it not true that you said, blah, da, 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 da? I said, yeah, but read all of my statement. You just read part of it. Read the whole thing. And when you read the whole thing, you go, oh, okay, well, sorry. No, you never hear that out of them, but that's what men do. And that's what it continues. So don't be surprised if Paul is writing this to these Romans, and look how long ago he was writing. If he's writing this to these Romans, then do you think anything's any different today? Do you think mankind has changed? Do you think a tiger's changed its stripes? No. Mankind has not changed any. They still want to do what they want to do. And the fact that it's sinful is sometimes it's part of that they call forbidden fruit. Oh, well, I like this. I like the intrigue. I like the adventure. of breaking the law. See if I can get away with it. Well, how many times have you been put in prison for this? Well, this is my 5th time. Well, do you think maybe you're not so smart? Maybe you need to stop doing this? Oh, I know, but it's such a rush. Yeah, it's a rush, all right.
The rush to the jail.
Yeah, it's a rush to the jailhouse. Well, nowadays, though, you might even be able to get off. There, in the last words of this, verse 8, he says, their condemnation is deserved. When God condemns them, they deserve what they're getting. And Paul is trying to teach the rest of these folks, look, you know what one of the biggest problems was in the early church? Was that you would have people that would come into the church like a wolf is going in among the sheep in a flock. Kind of hide, like put the lambskin over their heads so they can hide. Well, that would never work, but still, the point is, they were doing this very same thing. They would go within the church and pretend to be a member, and then they would try to poison the minds of the people that were in these. Now, when you say churches, they were, for the most part, in the very beginning, these were house churches. They were meeting like, there's a lot of that goes on around here even. That's how we all started out, was meeting in our homes. So it's kind of a difficult thing if somebody is with, you got a bunch of new believers, and you've got somebody who's in there trying to poison the thoughts of everybody that's there. Come on, that's not good. You got to, and that's why Paul would get rid of them. When you read his letter to the Corinthians, he said, if you've got somebody that, and also he was teaching Timothy, because Timothy was going to be basically a minister in one of the churches, I think in Ephesus, and he taught him, you get somebody like that within the church, get them out. Because they're in there to sabotage. Just the same, by the way, in the same way, this is just to show you how this has been going on forever. In the 50s, members of the American Communist Party, just one second, members of the American Communist Party had infiltrated every area of our government. The list of the people that were in different departments, and they didn't have to be the head of the department. All they had to do was be in there to try to make their agenda known. And it's the same thing as what we're talking about here. Yes, sir.
Well, when Paul was teaching Timothy, he told Timothy to call him out. He says,
Yep.
"I'm gonna point that guy out."
Yep.
So
Stay away from this guy.
Yeah, so everybody can know what he's doing.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's
And
right.
so he gets corrected or he comes back repentant.
Yeah, and if their sole purpose, if their sole purpose was to be in there to try to lead people astray, then
Yeah.
they weren't seeking after God anyway. So it's better just to, once they're found out, just to get rid of it. It's easy enough to do. Okay, so we're going to. We're not going to do a last song. So what we're going to do here. You want to do your